Lutzen, Electorate of Saxony, November 17th, 1632. Yesterday, Swedish King Gustavus Adolphus clashed with imperial forces under Wallenstein and Pappenheim on the field, fighting in heavy mist. The Protestants emerged victorious, the imperial invasion of Saxony stopped, but at a terrible cost. Pappenheim fell to a cannonball, and King Gustavus, his unit lost in the fog, was surrounded, killed, and his body stripped. 20,000 others lay slain. And today, the men and women of Lutzen bury the dead in mass graves. But as terrible as the violence of the field, it's nothing compared to what the two armies have, unwittingly, unleashed upon Saxony. Plague. And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. Thanks so much to Skillshare for helping us tell today's historic tale. We now come to the final element in our exploration of why the 30 Years' War proved to be so destructive: disease. Much like famine, epidemic disease was a common fixture of 17th century life. Even in times without war, local breakouts due to poor sanitation, or even waves of disease brought via trade networks happened periodically. In fact, even before the war, Germany had seen 3 waves of bubonic plague between 1607 and 1611. And with the lack of medical knowledge about the cause and treatment of disease, rates of serious illness and mortality were much higher. And actually, it wasn't until the 19th and 20th centuries that armies would suffer more deaths in combat than from what were known as camp diseases. Because when you rally an army in the 17th century, you draw a large number of people together who are mostly strangers, including some from isolated villages or hamlets that may not have the same immunities as people from urban areas or well-trafficked trade routes. Then add in the often unhygienic conditions of military life, living in tents, open latrine pits, contaminated water sources, and poor or old food, and you have the perfect recipe for gastrointestinal diseases like dysentery. Likewise, a lack of hygiene, inability to change clothes, and the necessity of living close to pack animals, livestock, and cavalry mounts led to outbreaks of lice that carried typhus and bubonic plague. And wherever troops marched, they passed on those diseases to the local population. Now, this was to some extent a normal feature of conflict at the time. But the 30 Years' War added an extra layer with its international nature. For instance, just with the Bohemian Revolt, imperial armies from Germany and Spain marched into Bohemia, bringing in new strains of disease from outside. Then, as the war progressed, the Dutch came, and the Swedish, and the French. But also remember that these national terms don't really mean much, since many of the troops were mercenaries recruited abroad. Scotsmen marched in the Swedish army of Gustavus Adolphus, and Italians with the Spanish. Then as the war dragged on, and more forces got involved, the waves of epidemic disease got increasingly deadly. Typhus and dysentery existed at a fairly moderate level throughout the conflict, and a bubonic plague outbreak in 1625 and 1626 tore through both armies and citizenry, killing several prominent generals. Yet it was the Swedish intervention under King Gustavus Adolphus in 1631 when things entered a new phase, both politically and medically. Because there were just more troops, more foreign allies, bigger battles, and increasingly, armies marching through the same area over and over and over. Bubonic plague exploded. It swept the lands of the Holy Roman Empire, depopulating villages as residents tried to flee the mysterious infection, sometimes only to carry it with them to wherever they found sanctuary. Populations displaced by war or military pillaging swelled nearby cities, creating new sanitation crises there that led to more typhus and dysentery outbreaks alongside the plague. And of course, the widespread famine lowered the immune systems of both soldiers and civilians, exacerbating the spread of disease. Plague began having major strategic consequences. In 1633, a Spanish army struck out from northern Italy, crossing the Alps to attack Rhineland. Instead of battling the enemy, however, it found itself decimated by bubonic plague. 2 years later, a French army would fall to the same fate when invading the Spanish Netherlands, with 17,000 soldiers dying or deserting, due not to the conflict, but camp disease. And Frederick V, who had helped kick off the conflict by accepting the crown of Bohemia from the rebels, died of an unknown infection in 1632, mere weeks after Gustavus died in Lutzen. Now, casualty numbers are notoriously difficult to wrestle with when it comes to the 30 Years' War. They can vary widely depending on what satellite conflicts you include, and local records are often unreliable. But in one study of civilian death records, a staggering 64% of deaths during the war came from bubonic plague. The result? Utter devastation. Frankfurt, May 7th, 1636. Thomas Howard, Earl of Arundel and Surrey, is an Englishman in a strange country. A diplomat under orders from King Charles I. He's likely beginning to wonder who it is exactly he's supposed to be talking to. On their boat trip along the main river to Frankfurt, his party passed numerous burned towns and castles ruined from siege. Changing to carriages at Frankfurt and hiring musketeers for protection, they strike south into rough country, hearing cannon fire over the horizon. It's nearly dark when they enter the village. Its name, he notices, translates to New Church. And there is a church, as well as several houses, one that's on fire. They call out announcing their presence, but no one answers. Faraway shots echo in the darkening trees. With the sun going down and the nearest town 4 miles away, they decide to stay the night. Their musketeers patrol in the suffocating dark, and Howard's servants cook his meals over timbers dragged from the burning house. Then, after a very tense evening, at first light, they start to investigate. The houses are all empty, not a soul remaining. Then, Howard himself goes to the small church and opens its double doors. The interior is ransacked, its altar and sacred images torn and defiled, and when he steps out into the churchyard, he sees a body scraped out of its grave by scavengers. Whether beasts or human ones, he cannot guess. Another body lies outside the fence. They hurry on, and it's only at their next stop that they learn the tale. It was not war that killed the village. It was plague. One family had succumbed, and rather than risk infection, the villagers had fled, stopping only to torch the affected house so travelers would not catch the disease. While Howard's account, or rather the account of his secretary, is unique in its texture and detail, the event itself was not uncommon. Things like it happened all over the Holy Roman Empire as the panic set in. And that panic, as panics often do, went to strange places. Some manifested as apocalyptic beliefs, or through deep racism and violence towards foreigners or outsiders. A rash of witch hunting broke out in the empire, mostly centered in places that, ironically, had been the least affected by the conflict, because the people on the front line of the misfortune and tragedy were generally too exhausted for the labor and energy-intensive campaigns of trials, burnings, and hangings, but those eaten up by anxiety about what could happen tomorrow channeled that fear into religious panic and violence. Yet it was not just the civilians living in the empire who were exhausted. After 3 decades of conflict, most of the participating nations were also running on empty. Many participants had expanded their military might, drained their treasuries, and had been forced to put down revolts over increased taxes at home. Spain was broke, France was too, and in England, the financial burdens of the war and Charles's attempt to boost the treasury without calling Parliament helped lead Great Britain into civil war. Plus, almost none of the political players who started the conflict were even still alive, and the whole conception about the war had shifted. While it had begun as a political-religious conflict, when Catholic France entered the fray on the side of the Protestant states, it quickly changed into a war about trying to counter and contain Habsburg power in Europe. And crucially, by the mid-1640s, the war had reached an equitable stalemate. Now, there had been numerous times, after the Bohemian Revolt died, after the Dutch were knocked out, or when Saxony made peace with Ferdinand, when the powers could have just said, "Enough's enough," and ended the slaughter. But at each point, one side was always just in too good of a position. Better to keep throwing troops into the meat grinder and make up for what's been lost. But now, everyone had a slice of the pie. Everyone had a negotiating position. By 1648, the Four Horsemen had run their course, and it was time, finally, to make peace, to draft a treaty at Westphalia. And whether you're crafting peace treaties, pies, or planning whatever your next creative endeavor is, Skillshare can help you level up all your learning. For the uninitiated, Skillshare is an online learning community featuring thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people on topics including illustration, design, photography, video, freelancing, and just too many to list all of them. Lately, I've been digging into the class Storytelling 101, Character, Conflict, Context, and Craft by Daniel Jose Older, because I'm always on the lookout for new ways to tell engaging stories. Also, since it's been a minute since we've updated the EC merch shop, I checked out Designing Great Stuff from Aaron Draplin, where I snagged some super helpful tips to make some upcoming items really pop. And then to round out my recent edutainment curriculum, I got lost in song with Claire Dove's Top Lining 101, Melody and Lyrics in Songwriting. Because as some of you may know by now, I've got a habit of writing parody tracks, and I've got some future ideas that I really wanted to rock. Plus, I love how Skillshare never really rests on its laurels, putting out new premium classes ad-free all the time, so there's always something awesome and unexpected you'll love learning about, all for under $10 a month. And speaking of the unexpected, this deal actually gets even better because the first 1,000 of you fine folks that click the link in the description below will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So you can learn something today that you didn't know yesterday, all while saving some cash and supporting EC at the same time. So thanks for that. That's right, Zoe. Ahmed Ziad Turk, Alicia Bramble, Casey Mustia, Dominic Valenciana, Joseph Blame, Kyle Murgatroyd, and O'Reels1 are fantastic legendary patrons.